You think you know yourself. You think you're in control. But right now, as you read this, there are 7 psychological territories inside your mind that are systematically destroying you. And the most dangerous part? You can't see them operating. You wake up every day believing you're the author of your thoughts, the director of your emotions, the CEO of your psychological corporation. But you're not. You're being run by forces so deep, so unconscious, so primitively powerful that they make your conscious mind look like a child playing dress-up with daddy's clothes. Carl Jung spent his entire life mapping these territories, not from an academic armchair, but by diving headfirst into his own psychological abyss. The man who gave us the concepts of the collective unconscious, archetypes, and psychological types didn't discover these through theory. He discovered them because he had the courage to go insane in a controlled way, to dialogue with the voices in his head, to face the monsters in his psychological basement. And what he found should terrify you, because Jung discovered that what you call your personality is actually a thin veneer covering a psychological underworld so complex, so autonomous, so powerful that it runs most of your life without your permission. These 7 places I'm about to show you aren't just concepts in a psychology textbook. They're active territories in your psyche right now, making decisions, influencing your relationships, sabotaging your success, and keeping you trapped in patterns you swear you want to break. The shadow everything you've rejected about yourself is plotting your next self-sabotage. The projection machine is populating your world with enemies and saviors that don't actually exist. Psychological complexes are possessing you like psychological demons, taking over your personality in specific situations, and making you act like someone you don't recognize. But here's what makes this especially dangerous. These territories operate in the dark. They're like psychological mafia families running your mind while you focus on the legitimate businesses upstairs. You think your problems are out there, difficult people, unfair circumstances, bad luck, but the real war is happening inside your psychological underworld, and you're losing because you don't even know you're fighting. Jung put it brutally: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Translation: the psychological forces you refuse to see will control your entire existence, and you'll convince yourself it's just how life is. Most people live and die as complete strangers to themselves. They spend decades fighting the same battles, attracting the same problems, repeating the same mistakes, and wondering why life feels like psychological Groundhog Day. They blame everyone and everything except the psychological territories they refuse to acknowledge. But you don't have to be one of them. The journey into these 7 dangerous places isn't for the weak. It requires the kind of psychological courage that most people don't possess. It means looking at parts of yourself you've spent years avoiding. It means accepting that your problems aren't out there. They're architectural features of your own psychological landscape. Jung called this journey individuation the process of becoming psychologically whole, not perfect, not healed, not fixed, whole. Which means integrating everything you've rejected, owning everything you've projected, and taking conscious control of everything that's been controlling you. These 7 places I'm about to show you have been running your life from the shadows. The question isn't whether they exist, they do. The question is whether you have the courage to turn on the lights and see what's really controlling you. Because once you see them, once you map these territories, once you understand how they operate, something changes. Not immediately, not easily, but inevitably. You stop being a psychological victim and become a conscious participant in your own becoming. The alternative is to keep living as a stranger in your own psychological house, controlled by forces you refuse to see, repeating patterns you swear you want to break, and wondering why you can't seem to change despite all your effort. Jung spent years in his psychological underworld and came back with a map. I'm about to show you that map. But I'm warning you now, once you see these territories, you can't unsee them. Once you understand how they operate, You can't pretend ignorance anymore. Are you ready to meet the real forces running your life? There's a monster living in your psychological basement, and you put it there. You've been feeding it with every quality you've rejected in yourself, every aspect of your personality you've deemed unacceptable, every part of your humanity you've tried to cut off and throw away. Jung called it the shadow, and it's the first and most dangerous psychological territory you must face. Here's what you don't understand about the shadow. It's not just the bad parts of you. It's everything you've rejected: your creativity, your sexuality, your aggression, your power, your vulnerability, your wildness. The shadow is your unlived life, your disowned potential, your rejected self trying to claw its way back into existence. And it will find a way. The shadow doesn't disappear when you reject it. It goes underground. It becomes autonomous. It starts operating your life from the psychological shadows, sabotaging you precisely when success threatens your carefully constructed self-image. Watch how this works. You pride yourself on being nice, so you reject your aggression into the shadow. But that aggression doesn't die. It turns passive-aggressive. You find yourself making cutting remarks, forgetting important commitments, or undermining people while maintaining your nice person facade. Your shadow aggression controls your behavior, while your conscious mind maintains plausible deniability. Or maybe you see yourself as rational and controlled, so you reject your emotional nature. Your shadow emotions don't disappear, they explode at inappropriate moments. You have disproportionate reactions to minor triggers. You make logical decisions that are actually driven by unconscious emotional needs. Your rejected emotions run your life while you pretend they don't exist. The shadow's favorite weapon is projection. What you can't stand in others is usually what you've rejected in yourself. That person who irritates you with their neediness? Check your shadow for rejected dependency. That colleague who enrages you with their arrogance? Look for disowned grandiosity. That friend whose messiness drives you crazy? Find your rejected chaos. Jung said it clearly: everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But most people use their irritation as evidence that the problem is out there, not recognizing it as a GPS system pointing directly to their disowned psychological material. The shadow creates what Jung called the dark brother, the version of you that does everything your conscious self swears it would never do. The shadow is why the nicest people can be surprisingly cruel, why the most controlled people have explosive outbursts, why the most generous people can be strangely selfish when no one's watching. Here's the psychologically brutal truth. Every quality you judge harshly in others exists in your shadow. Every behavior you find unforgivable in others is something your shadow is capable of. Every type of person you can't stand represents rejected aspects of your own personality. The shadow grows stronger through rejection. The more you insist you're not angry, not selfish, not manipulative, not weak, the more these qualities gain autonomous power in your psychological underworld. They start expressing themselves through unconscious behavior, self-sabotage, and what Jung called possession. Moments when the shadow takes over and you act in ways that feel completely foreign to your conscious identity. This is why people sabotage themselves just when things start going well. Success threatens the familiar self-image maintained by shadow rejection. If you've built your identity around struggling, your shadow will sabotage success. If you've built your identity around being powerless, your shadow will sabotage opportunities for genuine power. The shadow's influence is everywhere. The successful person who inexplicably makes self-destructive choices, the kind person who has moments of surprising cruelty, the confident person who suddenly becomes paralyzed by self-doubt. These aren't character flaws, they're shadow eruptions from rejected psychological material demanding recognition. But here's what most people don't understand. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean becoming your worst impulses. It means owning them consciously so they don't own you unconsciously. It means recognizing your capacity for everything you judge in others, which paradoxically makes you less likely to act out these patterns unconsciously. Shadow integration is about psychological honesty. It's admitting that you have the capacity for selfishness, cruelty, cowardice, manipulation, all the qualities you've spent your life rejecting. But when you own these qualities consciously, they lose their autonomous power over you. The person who admits their capacity for selfishness can choose generosity consciously. The person who owns their capacity for cruelty can choose kindness with awareness. The person who integrates their shadow doesn't become worse, they become whole. Your shadow contains not just your rejected darkness, but also your disowned light. Many people reject their power, their intelligence, their beauty, their creativity, just as intensely as they reject their negative qualities. Your shadow might contain the leader you're afraid to be, the artist you've always wanted to become, the powerful person you're terrified to own. Jung's challenge is simple but terrifying. Become who you are, not who you think you should be. But to do that, you must first reclaim everything you've rejected about who you are. Your shadow is waiting in the basement of your psyche, holding all the keys to your psychological freedom. The question is, do you have the courage to go down there and make friends with your monster? You're not seeing the world as it is, you're seeing the world as you are, and that difference is destroying your life in ways you can't even comprehend. Welcome to the Hall of Projections, the psychological territory where you turn everyone around you into characters in your internal psychological drama. Jung discovered something that should fundamentally change how you understand every relationship you've ever had. You don't see people as they are. You see them as unconscious carriers of your own psychological material. You project your internal conflicts onto them, then react to your own projections as if they're external reality. Think about your last major conflict. The person you were fighting with wasn't really the person standing in front of you. They were a movie screen onto which you projected your own unconscious psychological content. You were fighting with your projection, not with them, and they were probably doing the same thing to you. This is why the same types of conflicts follow you from relationship to relationship. It's not bad luck. It's not that you attract difficult people. It's that you're unconsciously casting people in the same psychological roles, then creating the same dramas with different actors. The projection machine works like this. You have unresolved psychological material, unmet needs, unprocessed emotions, unintegrated aspects of yourself. This material seeks expression and resolution. So your psyche scans the environment for suitable hooks, people who can carry your projections. Then, you unconsciously assign them roles in your psychological drama and react to them as if they actually are what you've projected onto them. Your romantic relationships are the most dangerous projection territory of all. You don't fall in love with people, you fall in love with your projections onto people. That person you can't live without is carrying your projection of everything you believe you need for wholeness. That person you can't stand is carrying your projection of everything you've rejected about yourself. The projection cycle is vicious. You project your psychological material onto someone, they inevitably fail to live up to your projection because they're human beings with their own psychology. You feel disappointed and betrayed. You blame them for not being what you needed them to be, and then you either try to change them to match your projection, or you find someone new to carry it. Most people cycle through relationships, jobs, and friendships without ever recognizing this pattern. They blame their ex for being selfish, without recognizing they projected their need for unconditional love onto someone who was never capable of providing it. They blame their boss for being controlling without recognizing they projected their own authority issues onto a normal workplace hierarchy. Here are the most dangerous projections that are probably running your life right now. The savior projection. You unconsciously seek out people who appear to need rescuing so you can feel valuable and needed. But when they don't want to be saved, or when they actually get better and don't need you anymore, you feel useless and abandoned. You're addicted to being needed. because you've projected your own worth onto your ability to fix others. The parent projection. You unconsciously expect your partner to be the perfect parent you never had. You project your unmet childhood needs onto them, then feel devastated when they act like a peer instead of a caretaker. You're trying to get your psychological wounds healed through your relationships instead of doing your own internal work. The enemy projection. You project your own self-hatred, shame, or internal criticism onto others, then fight them as if they're the source of your psychological pain. You're battling your own psychological demons, but you've located them in other people. Every external fight is actually an internal war you're refusing to engage directly. The completion projection. You project your disowned psychological qualities onto others and become addicted to being around them to feel whole. If you've rejected your own strength, you'll be drawn to powerful people. If you've rejected your own sensitivity, you'll be attracted to emotional people, but you're not actually connecting with them. You're trying to possess the qualities you've disowned in yourself. The most psychologically brutal aspect of projection is this. The very qualities that initially attract you to someone often become the qualities you eventually can't stand about them. The strength you were initially drawn to becomes controlling. The sensitivity that first attracted you becomes neediness. The spontaneity you loved becomes irresponsibility. What changed? Not them. Your projection shifted as your psychological needs changed. Living in projection is exhausting because you're constantly managing your psychological dramas instead of having genuine relationships with actual people. You're directing a movie that never resolves because you're fighting with characters that exist primarily in your own psyche. The projection machine also works in reverse. You can project your positive qualities onto others and become convinced you're inferior. You project your intelligence onto experts and become convinced you're stupid. You project your attractiveness onto others and become convinced you're ugly. You project your power onto authorities and become convinced you're helpless. Jung's challenge is devastating. Withdraw your projections. Stop expecting others to carry your psychological material. Stop fighting battles with phantoms. Start seeing people as separate human beings with their own psychology instead of as characters in your internal drama. This doesn't mean projections are bad. They're inevitable and sometimes necessary. The problem is unconscious projection. Projecting without knowing you're projecting, then reacting to your projections as if they're external reality. Conscious projection withdrawal is one of the most psychologically mature things you can do. It means asking, what is this person triggering in me? Instead of, why are they doing this to me? It means taking responsibility for your emotional reactions instead of blaming others for causing them. When you withdraw your projections, something miraculous happens. You start seeing people as they actually are. You start having genuine relationships instead of psychological dramas. You stop being disappointed by people failing to live up to projections they never signed up for. But here's the price. You have to deal with your own psychological material instead of fighting it in other people. You have to meet your own needs instead of expecting others to meet them. You have to face your own internal conflicts instead of creating external battles. The Hall of Projections has been your psychological movie theatre. The question is, are you ready to turn off the projector and start living in reality? You are not one person. You are a collection of psychological fragments, and some of them have declared independence from your conscious control. Jung called these autonomous psychological entities complexes, and right now, they're running more of your life than you dare to admit. A complex is like a psychological subpersonality, with its own agenda, its own emotional charge, its own way of seeing the world. These aren't just bad moods or triggers. They're organized psychological systems that can completely hijack your consciousness and make you act like someone you don't recognize. Think about the last time you had a completely disproportionate reaction to something minor. Your boss made a simple request, and suddenly you felt like a criticized child. Your partner asked a reasonable question, and you responded with the fury of someone whose survival was being threatened. That wasn't you reacting, that was a complex taking possession of your consciousness. Jung discovered that trauma doesn't just create memories, it creates autonomous psychological fragments. Every unprocessed emotional experience, every overwhelming situation you couldn't handle, every developmental need that wasn't met creates a complex. These complexes then sit in your psychological system like landmines, waiting to be activated. The mother complex is probably running more of your life than you realize. If you had an overprotective mother, you might have a complex that makes you feel helpless and seeks out relationships where you can remain dependent. If you had a rejecting mother, you might have a complex that makes you push away nurturing while desperately craving it. If you had an absent mother, you might have a complex that either makes you clingy with partners or completely avoids intimacy. Your mother complex doesn't just affect your relationships, it influences how you take care of yourself, how you nurture others, how you handle dependency and independence. It can make a successful adult feel like a scared child when faced with certain types of authority figures. It can make you sabotage relationships precisely when they start to feel nurturing. The father complex is equally powerful. It controls how you relate to authority, hierarchy, power, and achievement. If you had an authoritarian father, you might have a complex that either rebels against all authority or submits to it completely. If you had a weak father, you might have a complex that either becomes tyrannical to compensate or avoids taking any leadership role. Your father complex influences your career, your relationship to success, your ability to set boundaries, your relationship with competition. It can make you sabotage yourself just when you're about to achieve something significant because success threatens the familiar dynamic of your father relationship. But here's what makes complexes truly dangerous. They select what you notice and ignore. When a complex is activated, it literally changes your perception of reality. The mother complex makes you hypersensitive to any sign of rejection or abandonment. The father complex makes you see competition and judgment everywhere. The inferiority complex makes you interpret neutral comments as criticism. Complexes create self-fulfilling prophecies. The abandonment complex unconsciously pushes people away, then uses their leaving as evidence that everyone always leaves. The inadequacy complex unconsciously sabotages success, then uses the failure as proof that I'm not good enough. The victim complex unconsciously creates situations that reinforce powerlessness. The most terrifying aspect of complex possession is that it feels completely rational when it's happening. The complex provides its own logic, its own emotional conviction, its own version of reality. You don't feel possessed, you feel like you're finally seeing the truth and responding appropriately. Complex possession is why people can be completely different in different situations. The confident professional who becomes an anxious child around their parents. The kind person who becomes cruel when their shame complex is triggered. The rational person who becomes completely irrational when their money complex is activated. Jung identified several universal complexes that affect almost everyone. The power complex makes you either desperately seek control or completely avoid it. Shows up as either dominating others or being unable to assert yourself appropriately. The inferiority complex makes you either compensate through grandiosity or collapse into worthlessness. Creates the exhausting cycle of proving your worth through external achievements that never feel sufficient. The persecution complex makes you interpret normal interactions as attacks, creates a psychological reality where you're constantly under threat, which makes actual connection impossible. The savior complex makes you unconsciously seek out people and situations that need rescuing so you can feel valuable. When people don't want to be saved, or when they get better without your help, you feel useless. Complexes are activated by specific situations, people, or emotional states. Once activated, they take over your consciousness and make you react according to their programming rather than your conscious intentions. This is why you can know exactly what you should do in a situation, but find yourself doing the opposite when the complex is in charge. The goal isn't to eliminate complexes, that's impossible. The goal is to develop conscious relationship with them, to recognize when a complex is activated, understand what it wants, and choose whether to follow its programming or respond from conscious awareness. Complex integration requires what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. Instead of being possessed by the complex or trying to suppress it, you develop the ability to feel its activation while maintaining conscious choice about how to respond. When you're no longer possessed by your complexes, something remarkable happens. You stop having the same conflicts with the same types of people. You stop sabotaging yourself in predictable ways. You stop being triggered by situations that used to completely hijack your consciousness. But integration requires recognizing these psychological fragments as parts of yourself, not external forces. It means taking responsibility for the complex-driven behaviors you've been unconsciously enacting while believing they were justified responses to external circumstances. Your complexes have been running your life from the shadows. The question is, are you ready to develop conscious relationship with the psychological fragments that have been possessing you? You've seen the territories. You've mapped the psychological underworld that's been controlling your life. Now comes the most crucial question. What are you going to do about it? Because knowledge without integration is just psychological entertainment. Understanding these 7 dangerous places, without doing the work to transform your relationship with them, changes nothing. The remaining dangerous territories are waiting for you to acknowledge them. Inflation, when you identify with archetypal forces and believe you're the savior, the victim, or the chosen one. Animus possession, when you're controlled by your internal images of the opposite sex, projecting impossible standards onto partners or being possessed by contrasexual moods. Collective possession, when you lose your individual psychology to mass movements, groupthink, or cultural hysteria. Psychic dissociation, when you split between your public persona and your authentic self until you don't know who you really are anymore. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. You don't eliminate these psychological territories. You don't fix them or heal them or transcend them. You develop conscious relationship with them. You integrate them. You become psychologically whole, not psychologically perfect. The shadow doesn't disappear when you integrate it. You develop conscious relationship with your capacity for everything you've rejected in yourself. You own your potential for selfishness, cruelty, weakness, and chaos, which paradoxically makes you less likely to act these out unconsciously. When you know you're capable of being an asshole, you can choose kindness with awareness rather than performing niceness from unconscious compulsion. Projection withdrawal doesn't mean you stop projecting. Projection is a normal psychological function. It means you stop unconsciously projecting and then reacting to your projections as external reality. You start asking, what is this person triggering in me, instead of, why are they doing this to me? You take responsibility for your emotional reactions instead of making others responsible for your psychological state. Complex integration doesn't mean your complexes disappear. It means you develop conscious relationship with them. You recognize when a complex is activated, understand what it wants, and choose how to respond instead of being possessed by its programming. You might still feel like a criticized child when your boss makes a request, but you can choose to respond like a competent adult. This is Jung's vision of individuation, becoming consciously who you've always been unconsciously. Not becoming someone different, but integrating all the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, rejecting, or unconsciously enacting. But let's be psychologically honest about what this integration process actually requires. First, you must develop the capacity for psychological brutality with yourself. Not self-hatred or self-attack, but the surgical precision to see your psychological patterns without the cushion of justification. Most people can't handle looking directly at how their unconscious patterns create their life circumstances. They prefer to blame external forces rather than take psychological responsibility. Second, You must give up the addiction to being right about your victimhood. Every projection you withdraw, every complex you integrate, every shadow aspect you own means taking responsibility for your part in creating your psychological reality. This is terrifying because it means admitting you have power over your life circumstances, which means you can no longer blame others for your psychological suffering. Third, you must surrender the comfort of familiar psychological patterns. Your complexes, projections, and shadow patterns create predictable suffering, but it's familiar suffering. Integration means entering psychological territory you've never consciously inhabited. It means responding to situations in ways that feel foreign to your familiar self-image. Fourth, you must develop tolerance for psychological paradox. Integration means holding contradictory truths simultaneously. You are both powerful and powerless, loving and selfish, wise and foolish, strong and vulnerable. Most people's psychological systems can't handle this kind of complexity. They need to be either good or bad, either victim or perpetrator, either right or wrong. The integration process is not comfortable. It's not healing in the way most people understand healing. It's not about feeling better or becoming more positive. It's about becoming more psychologically real, more conscious of the forces that have been controlling you, more able to choose your responses instead of being lived by unconscious patterns. Jung's promise is not happiness, it's psychological freedom. Freedom from being possessed by complexes you don't understand. Freedom from fighting battles with projections that don't exist. Freedom from sabotaging yourself through shadow rejection. Freedom from living someone else's version of your life. But this freedom comes with a price. You must become responsible for your entire psychological reality. Every reaction, every pattern, every repetitive conflict becomes yours to understand and integrate instead of someone else's fault to blame. The question Jung poses to every human being is simple but devastating. Will you become conscious, or will you be lived by unconscious forces? Will you take responsibility for the psychological territories that have been controlling you, or will you continue to be possessed by them while pretending you're in control? Most people choose unconsciousness. It's easier. It allows them to maintain their victimhood, their projections, their familiar suffering. They can keep blaming others for their problems, keep fighting battles with phantoms, keep being possessed by complexes, while believing they're just responding appropriately to external circumstances. But if you've made it this far, if you've had the psychological courage to look at these 7 dangerous places, you're not most people. You have a choice to make: remain a stranger to yourself, controlled by forces you refuse to see, or begin the most important journey of your life, the journey towards psychological wholeness. Jung spent his entire life exploring these territories and came back with a map. You now have that map. The question is, do you have the courage to use it? The unconscious will become conscious, Jung warned, either through your awareness or through your fate. Either you make these psychological territories conscious and develop relationship with them, or they will continue to control your life while you call it destiny, bad luck, or other people's fault. Your psychological freedom is waiting, but you have to choose it, claim it, and integrate it. No one can do this work for you. No one is coming to save you from your own psychological patterns. The 7 dangerous places have been your psychological prison. They can become your psychological liberation. The choice, as always, is yours.